I am Megan Maloney, the Chief Academic Officer at American Reading Company. And today you are in for a wonderful conversation as we talk about the tales of a curriculum adoption. And we have two of our ARC Core partner districts, Ansonia, Connecticut, and Winnetka, Illinois, that will be discussing their journey and how they went through a curriculum adoption, as many people are looking, many school districts are looking for a high quality curriculum. These two districts are going to share with you how they decided on their curriculum and how they're working towards their implementation. And all of this today will be led by Dr. Irvin Scott, who will facilitate the Voices from the Field webinar. But let's get started and meet our district and school leaders. Amy, can you start us off?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Casciello. I am the principal of Mead School in Ansonia, Connecticut, and I'm pleased to be here today with you.
Hi, my name is Erin Guerrera. I'm a literacy coach for grades 3 through 5 at Prendergast School in Ansonia.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kayla Jarin. I'm the Director of Literacy and Social Studies for Ansonia Public Schools. Happy to be here today.
And now we'll hear from Winnetka. Jennifer.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Fegan. I am the teacher on special assignment with Winnetka Public Schools.
I'm Dr. Luke Livingston, principal at Crow Island Elementary School in Winnetka, Illinois.
Hi, everyone. I'm Becky Matheson, the Assistant Superintendent of Innovation Teaching and Learning from Winnetka. We're so happy to be here and honored to share our story with you.
Thank you. We are so excited to have Ansonia and Winnetka with us today, and also excited to have Dr. Irvin Scott lead this discussion. And Dr. Irvin Scott is on faculty at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where his concentration is on educational leadership. He also leads an initiative with faith and education communities together called the Leadership Institute of Faith and Education. Harvard, Dr. Scott was in the trenches. Dr. Scott was worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for many years. And prior to working at the Gates Foundation, Dr. Scott was a teacher, principal, and assistant superintendent and chief academic officer across the East Coast in Maryland, DC, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. At American Reading Company, we are honored that Dr. Scott is a member of our academic advisory board, as well as our facilitator of Voices from the Field. Dr. Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Megan. And most importantly, thank you to our colleagues from Winnetka and Ansonia. And we're going to jump right into things. First of all, I always like to acknowledge that these are individuals who are doing the work on the ground, even as we speak. You'll see them in their schools, in their classrooms, in their offices. And so hearing from them is really, really important, especially when it comes to understanding the implementation of great curriculum materials, great professional development, great teaching and learning. So let's start at the beginning with this question around why did each of the districts decide it was time for a new ELA curriculum? I suspect that there are districts out there who are either early on or still deciding. And so as we take up this question, and we'll hear from Winnetka first. What were you looking for when you were looking for a new curricula? What were some of the challenges that got you to this place? Last thing I'll say is I love, love, love the fact that we have teachers, we have principals, we have district leaders, so we can hear things from multiple perspectives. Let's start with Assistant Superintendent Becky Matheson. What prompted the district? And then we'll hear from Dr. Luke and then Jennifer.
Well, I was just joined the district about 3 years ago. And at the time, our strategic plan included a focus on looking at K-1 literacy because we did not have a systemic way that we were approaching instruction and foundational skills. Furthermore, when we dug into things such as our achievement data, our student growth data, we were noticing our students were achieving at the levels or growing at the levels we'd like to see throughout our K-8 system. And we also had an over-identification of students in the area of special education with needs tied to reading because we didn't have that strong Tier 1 program in place. So that strategic plan goal quickly went from looking at K-1 foundational skills to looking at our entire literacy program, K through 8. As we began that journey, we noticed some other gaps we wanted to fill. One was having a guaranteed and viable curriculum so that we had consistency of instruction within and among our grades. And then also the presence of evidence-based practices in terms of instruction, as well as how our professionals were partnering together.
Very helpful. Occasionally, I will uplift a couple things that I hear. I won't do that throughout the time because we'll never get through everybody. But I just want to lift up a couple of things that seem to be drivers: systemic approach, a need for a systemic approach driven by data that they were seeing. A particular data point was over-identification of special ed. Luke, pick it up from there.
Yeah, and I would just add on to all of those great points that Becky made, but I would just share, just as a principal who joined the district around the same time as Becky, I think coming in after COVID, coming in after the pandemic, we definitely also had a renewed focus on how are we making sure all kids are, where they need to be academically. But we also had, I think, parents having a snapshot into what kids were learning and doing in school. And so that was also a driver of, we had some inconsistent practices happening across the district. And so that put a renewed focus back on how can we make sure that kids are prepared, but also we have consistent practices happening across classrooms.
Consistent practices coming in after COVID. Already we've heard from two individuals who are coming into the district around the same time that this is beginning to happen, which I think which is powerful. And we might pick that up a little later on. Jennifer?
Yes, I have the perspective of just being a teacher on special assignment and being in the district for 22 years. So I'd seen where we had come from before and moving into this. But the only thing I would add on to what Dr. Matheson and Dr. Livingston added was communicating out the why to all stakeholders. I think it's really important, that you not only know what the why is and have that rationale, but to share it with your teachers, your coaches, your administrative team, your community, so that we can stay rooted in that when we're looking and piloting and adopting.
Thank you very much. The why, understanding what that why is, communicating. And then Jennifer mentioned when you're looking, when you're adopting, and when you're piloting, it's almost a process that we can unpack because it doesn't just happen. It sounds like they didn't just find one and just ran with it. There was a process. We'll unpack that process. All right, let's go to Ansonia. Who wants to kick us off? Maybe Kayla? Want to kick us off?
Sure. So for our curriculum, this is my 4th year in Ansonia and in this position. And I almost within the first month that I started, what I heard from teachers across grade levels, especially at the elementary level, was that the curriculum wasn't really meeting their needs as teachers, and it wasn't meeting the needs of students. And we really had data that supported that. We would have, I would say, pieces of curriculum kind of tried to be woven and connected together. So it was Learn Zillion for reading, Teachers College, the writing program. And we were also in K through 2 using the independent reading level assessment and the toolkits for small group instruction. And so we had all these components that really didn't speak to each other. And that really wasn't helping our teachers, and that wasn't helping our students. And something that I heard over and over again is we just didn't really have the high quality materials and resources that teachers were looking for. And also our curriculum really didn't match the diversity of our students. Our students weren't necessarily seeing themselves in the text that we were using. And we were actually really excited when Connecticut's Right to Read legislation came out in 2021, and they were talking about approved reading programs that were aligned to the science of reading and just the way that we know that students learn how to read best. And then in 2022, we discovered that American Reading Company was on the list, and that just really all the stars aligned, and that was kind of how we helped to make that decision. And we also talked about the why and really thinking about the curriculum that we are selecting really has to match our why and our vision as well.
Wonderful. Kayla added something that other districts out there might be in a similar situation, where she talked about Connecticut's right to read, or whatever the legislation was in Connecticut, that gave the district an opportunity to do something that sounded like was desperately needed. I'll use the word coherence because there was a lot of things happening. You heard Kayla say, someone's doing this, school's doing this. And so this legislation, which we don't oftentimes think about as an opportunity, but this legislation allowed them to go somewhere that they weren't able to go before. Really, really important point. And also hearing back from the teachers. All right, let's continue on. Why don't you jump in there, Amy, if you don't mind?
So my story is a little interesting. I have both perspectives. I'm 20 years now in Ansonia, and I've been a principal now, administration for 6 years, and I actually taught in the school that I'm in. So I taught first grade. So coming into the position as a former teacher of literacy and how important it is, it has always been a frustration culturally in this building that we're not aligned. Our kids are going on to second grade, they're going on to third grade. Everyone says they're at different reading levels. There's frustration for grouping, and we're all over the place. So we're all kind of pulling these materials supplemental from different resources, and there's frustration, right? So obviously there was always a need here, and it was such a great experience to see us roll out ERLA. And coming from where we were and seeing the teachers in this building buy into it, not just because, oh, we finally have a curriculum, but the variety of genres, choice. Obviously, there's a writing portion. So there's a lot of layers within ERLA. So it's obviously a learning curve for our teachers, but they love it. And, I think it's a really good perspective to see it as a teacher and then as an admin and seeing that cultural change and shift. And finally seeing kids with books in their hands and reading appropriate level texts, because that was always a challenge, especially in first grade teaching, is that we had kids that had books in their hand that weren't appropriate. So now you're wasting all this time trying to build stamina. And now you have a program that is aligned with where the child needs to be. And next year and the years to come, when that child is transitioning through each grade level, teachers are no longer questioning what reading level they are. Everyone universal is on the same page, and it's been a tremendous growth period too for all of us. And speaking from my school, we're very happy, and so are the teachers.
And the power of you being there, Amy, for so many years as a teacher and now as the principal, and seeing that trajectory and experiencing that frustration as a teacher, and now seeing the difference as a principal. Really powerful. And you talked about the different ELA components, including writing. You talked about having kids with books in their hands. And then you mentioned a word that I want us to come back to, or we can all remember, and that was choice, which I think is really, really important, which is tied to one of the core components of what ARC provides and what these materials provide. Let's go to Erin. Great perspective from district and principal.
Thank you. So just to echo what Kayla and Amy said, I also have heard from many teachers that before we adopted our new curriculum, they were using kind of a mishmash of lots of different resources, having to do a lot of extra legwork to try to find homegrown resources. They found it confusing for themselves and for students, and really insufficient to meet students' needs. As a result, things were inconsistent across classrooms and across grade levels. There wasn't alignment, and our students were really struggling, and our assessment data showed that as well. We had really, really skillful teachers who just didn't have the materials that they needed to do the work that they needed to do. So they were frustrated. And since they've had these new materials in hand and they're able to work with high quality resources, the change in motivation has been great.
Teachers working hard, but not working necessarily with the best tools, is what I'm hearing there. Before we segue to another question, Kayla, I think it was you who talked about materials that reflected the identity of the students. And maybe others want to jump in on that. Can you say a little more about that? I picked that up real quick.
I think for us, Ansonia is predominantly Hispanic. We have a growing MLL population. And I think, I've got to see it firsthand, and Amy and Aaron can speak to this too, but I was in a classroom where in grade 1, teacher was reading a book from our family stories unit, and it had phrases in both Spanish and English, and the teacher was talking about abuelita, and this student just raised his hand so high and he said, "I have an abuelita," and then there was just like a rush of conversation where students were talking and learning from one another. And, some students were like, "What does that mean?" And some students were talking about, "Well, it's like grandmother." And so it was just interesting. We even had a student too, they were reading, one of the stories where they were reading was about Ramadan. And there was a student in the classroom who became an expert and was able to speak about his family and his just part of his life, part of his culture, part of his background in such a way that was so respectful, and the students were hanging on every word that he was saying. And so kind of allowing and empowering our teachers to make that move and our students to feel so heard and recognized and seen is just invaluable. Like there's nothing more that I could say about that, but we weren't doing that previously. And that also is for us a very strong family connection, because our families are thanking us for, giving their child time and space to talk about who they are.
Beautiful. Love that story. Critically important. Embedded in the curricula already. We know great teachers, as Aaron referred to, people working really hard, do those types of things when they're trying to make connection with kids. But when the curricula itself, when the materials have that sort of identity affirming photos or literature, or however you want to describe it, present, kids they achieve at higher levels, I think. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's go to the actual journey of adoption, right? So we started with the question of why. Now let's talk a little bit about how you begin to adopt. And I'm going to just throw this out there: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what you don't have to do is act like it all went perfectly. So I'd love to hear some of the rough spots as well as some things that really went well. Why don't we start with Ansonia here? We'll start with you, Aaron, from a teacher perspective. As you began to move forward, you gave that great sort of process of looking, adopting, piloting. Talk a little bit about what it looked like to be doing this from a teacher's perspective early on.
So I came on board last year. So I was not a part of that process. I'm sure Kayla and Amy can speak more to it. But I will say that teachers who had the experience using the ERLA leveling system, it was such an easier transition for them to learn the new curriculum, ARC Core. So that experience that was sort of phased bit by bit really helped in the process for them. So it wasn't so much new learning all at once.
Gotcha. So you come in once it's already implemented from me. Let me ask you this. What was your early professional development for you since you're coming in new? I'm assuming there was some PD that you had to do. Can you speak to the PD around it?
Yeah, so the professional development from ARC has been great. So like day one, our consultant was in there, helping all of us get acclimated to the new program, answering any questions we had, letting us hit the ground running. So I was learning it along with most of the teachers. And our ARC coach, Sarah, is always available, if I have questions or if teachers have questions, and there's always resources that she's sharing with us as well. So, right away from day one, she was there for us.
Powerful. Art coach Sarah. Sounds personal. right? A teacher knowing the art coach by first name, that's not typically what we have when we get professional development. I think that's important. Amy, won't you jump in around the implementation? You were there before, sounds like during and after.
I think for us, I think the most effective piece of all this is collaboration. So one challenge that we always had as a district, because I can remember being a teacher, is never a time with grade levels for planning, using materials together and planning for small group. So when that shift came, when we started getting the new materials, it was just the ability for grade level team members to come with their different strengths and weaknesses, because we all have them, and come together was so crucial. And in the learning curve. So although there's like, whenever anything new is rolling out, there's all that sometimes hysteria, like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? But we're working together with IRLA. And because IRLA provides so many resources, teachers knew that they had the support at their fingertips, and they had the ability to kind of collaborate with grade level team members, which was something that we struggled with, especially in my district.
Great, thank you. Bringing the strengths and the weaknesses. What would you add there, Kayla, from the implementation standpoint?
To be transparent, I was nervous. Like, I was nervous about the shift, not because I didn't think it was 100% the right move to make, but we weren't following a normal, I would say, a curriculum process in terms of having a committee, piloting different options, weighing the pros and cons of each. But what I tried to do, and I got this advice from another director in New York who was already implementing ARC Core, what I tried to do was show them all the ways that our current curriculum wasn't working from all the conversations that we had. And I think, again, like, what Amy's saying is about a collaboration, but also, like, it's really important for leaders across the board to be able to really listen, not from an approach of defending anything, but an approach of listening to really hear and understand. And so I was able to capture all the ways that our current curriculum was not working for us and all the frustrations. And then I was also able to show them everything that we would be getting through moving to ARC Core. Yes, we wanted to be in alignment with right to read legislation and the science of reading, but also think about the bigger picture of everything that we talked about. We didn't have enough diverse texts so our students could see themselves in the text that we were reading. We had a disjointed curriculum that didn't have coherence. We weren't seeing the student growth that we wanted, and the list could go on and on. And I think also, and this is like my secret trick, but it's something that Sarah Sandusky and I have talked about at length, teachers fall in love with materials. When they have books in their hand and they could see, like, this is what our kids are going to be reading. This is what I get to teach. These are the resources that we have. It's just a different vibe. They get so excited. So I went in thinking, I was going to have to really, go to bat and explain, the why, which I did, but the overwhelming amount of support and buy-in and excitement. I mean, we had like planning parties. I mean, there was just, and Amy could talk more about this too, and so could Erin, even though Erin came in, last year, there's a vibe of positivity that to me makes all the difference. And so I think approaching it that way really helped too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So much there. Let's go to the Winnetka implementation. Becky, you mind kicking us off? What did implementation look like there? And I'm gonna plant the seed for another question, which is, what did it look like in terms of engaging teachers? We'll hear that from the principal perspective and the district perspective. And go ahead, kick us off, Becky.
Well, we had a little bit more of the traditional route in that, like many districts, we have an existing curriculum revision cycle. But one thing that we did a little bit differently was we opened up the process to anyone. So we had a literacy leadership committee. We had almost 40 members of the committee, which ranged from classroom teachers who would ultimately be using the materials to special education teachers who partner with them, interventionists who are helping get students ready, for that grade level work. We had some of our librarians, of course, our literacy coaches and our administrators. And we took the first part of our journey together really to learn. We had partnered with the Reading League initially to learn a little bit about the science of reading and really took a deep dive into some of their resources. We read various articles. the state of Illinois came out with the Illinois Comprehensive Literacy Plan, which helped provide guidance. It wasn't policy, it was guidance for us to be able to look at how we're implementing literacy. And then from there, did the more traditional route of what are we looking for, identified some resources we might be interested in, heard from the vendors, and then were able to identify which resources to pilot. And then we actually opened up the pilot to anyone that wanted to participate. And I was floored in a good way that we had 69 teachers that decided to pilot. And so when I talked to other directors, they're like, now what did you do? And what did that look like? It was a massive undertaking. And for a department that focuses on teaching and learning in all areas, grades K-8, it was a big shift in our focus, but I think well worth it because we had so many teachers involved. We used a pretty comprehensive tool, a Google Form survey that looked at different features. We didn't want to look at, is it aligned with Common Core or not, because there's other resources that can tell us that. We wanted to know, given our local portrait of a graduate or some of our, educational tenants, how are these programs tied to that? One challenge that we faced with that is while we had qualitative pieces, we gathered quantitative data as well. So you can imagine 69 users, all of the data that we collected, and we also surveyed students. We didn't have as many students in the younger grades participate, but in the older grades, I had almost 200 respondents from the student perspective on their engagement. So it was quite a lot of data for us to go through. And then we presented to our school board, and I think one thing that made a huge difference was the board had been hearing from me regularly for over a year about literacy work. So I just put a call out to the literacy committee. Would anyone be willing to join? And we had 11 panelists, and I was very fortunate in that it reflected the broad range of roles that I mentioned before. And they really helped to paint a picture about how the adoption of these new materials and these new practices would make a difference for students. What was going to look different? So we really tried to illustrate a day in a life with using these new materials. We just started implementing this fall. We're about 45 days in. And so we did some initial training in June, just because teachers were very eager to start learning about the materials. We did the follow-up training at the beginning of the year, and of course have been partnering with our very helpful, very knowledgeable, and very patient our coaches, including Lauren. So I think that's been incredibly beneficial as we get into implementation. Just this week, I met with a small team because we had put out some tier 1 expectations, and that's one of the documents that I had shared that I thought might be helpful. I didn't want to put out something that was overwhelming or too many pages for teachers to look at. So there's 7 expectations on there, and there's simple things like basically, if we open the resources and are we using them? If we go into a classroom, are we seeing that we're following the scope and sequence or teaching some of the students the routines? And so some of our early information back about that is we're hitting the mark with those. And just this week, I met with the team to say, okay, where can we provide some further guidance? Because I know if I put out, again, a 20-page handbook, that's going to be confusing to people, right? We have to keep the expectations and direction short. It's also my belief that teachers are knowledge workers who are paid to think for a living. And in our situation, we were shifting from teachers who really had a lot of autonomy with the curriculum to now we're providing you what it is that we want students to know and be able to do, those priority standards. We're providing you the assessments. So you have to shift your thinking more into the lane of responding to the students in front of you. And it has not been an easy lift. Just yesterday, I was in a meeting with a teacher who said, I'm 25 years into my career and I have to take my teacher guide home every night. And it's that new learning piece, but it is also really asking people to change things. Just today, I was talking to a coach about this feeling of a grieving process, that they're grieving the loss of fill in the blank, whether it's the autonomy, that favorite dinosaur book, whatever it is. So there's definitely some challenges that we're facing, but I think having so many people involved has given people some confidence or feeling like there's a strong foundation or that they did have involvement. It wasn't done to them, but with them.
So much there. Let me ask you this real quick, Becky. You were describing the process sort of from beginning to end, your 45 days in the implementation. how long would you describe, how long do you think the process was for deciding before you got to implementation? A year, 6 months, 3 months? People are probably wondering that.
Yeah, so we initiated the literacy committee in January of 2023. By May of 2023, we had selected what we were going to pilot. We ran the pilot from October of 2023 until about February of 2024. So it gave teachers a window and they chose one unit to pilot. We didn't pilot for an entire year. And then we had a working meeting with the board in March, which was incredibly beneficial, to take an hour to review everything with them and tell them what our recommendation is. Then we had the panel come during that April meeting where the school board actually voted to present. So it was about a year and a half process.
Very, very helpful. Very helpful you just walked us beautifully through that entire process, which sounded like it was very engaged, involved a lot of stakeholders. It went all the way up to the board. And you also leveraged, it wasn't a policy in Illinois, but it did sound like some recommendations that were coming down from the Department of Illinois, Department of Education, state of Illinois, which is also another important thing to consider. Not always policy requirements, but there are structures that exist sometimes that come from the state to support. Luke, what did this look like from a principal perspective?
Yeah, so I would echo everything Becky shared. I would just say I was a part of the literacy committee when it formed, so I've been along on the ride from start to finish, which has been exciting. You know, I think one thing I found that was super helpful was that we were putting options in front of teachers that met certain like thresholds that we were willing to look at. And so we used like an Ed Reports rubric, we used the Reading League rubric, we had some self-made like feedback collection tools that we used to help us like make some of those decisions in those initial months so that we knew what our piloting options were. As a principal, I felt like opening it up was actually really nice because I had 100% of my homeroom teachers participated. So from like a parent lens, we're all in this together. We're all doing this work together. Everyone's kind of replacing a unit. It's going to look a little different from classroom to classroom, but that's okay because we're going to get to a good result at the end. So that was super helpful. And then I think having the literacy committee kind of like own this work and communicate out really built buy-in from staff, but also it was colleague to colleague conversations. So there was like a clear structure, but it didn't feel top down. And I think that was super important for our district. I would also just say like the piloting year was, everyone was in different places. And so as a principal, you just have to be okay with a little bit of chaos for a short period of time. But we got to a really positive result. And then now shifting into implementation, I think my school was the first, when Lauren visited, we had our first visit. We visited all the classrooms on like a walkthrough kind of informal with my literacy coach as well. And I mean, we were 25 days into school and everyone had the resources out. Everyone was where they were supposed to be. That was nice to see that we were able to like bring people on the journey and that I wasn't like haggling with people or opening boxes still. That had happened right away. And so, I mean, we're now talking about assessments and shifts we need to make in instruction and looking at student work. So it's a really comfortable place to be in terms of changing practices from a school lens.
So helpful. I got to come back to something that Luke just said. I'll try to do it, but I'll do it after I hear Jennifer. One thing that Luke said was clear structure, but didn't feel top down. I think that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind around successful implementation. But not necessarily easy to do, right? So you create a structure and it can seem top down, but he said there was a clear structure, but it didn't feel top down. The thing, I'll come back to it in a second. Jennifer, you want to add anything to the implementation of Winnetka?
I would just say that like during that pilot process and then implementation, it's finding time and space for teachers to converse with each other. So part of the challenge around the pilot was that like in even Luke's building, let's say his first grade classroom, there were 3 different knowledge building curriculums being piloted at the same time. So you're talking to your colleagues in your building about these different programs and you're excited and you want to share. But then when they had cohorts at the other buildings who, for example, all piloted ARC. So you're trying to carve out time and space for teachers to have conversations with their colleagues in their building about the different programs that they're seeing, and then also coordinate cross-district conversations around, oh, we're all piloting ARC. Let's talk about that and dig into the unit and what are we noticing. So I think also the structure piece of it that Luke was discussing, of having those structures and the framework to evaluate materials and resources and to make decisions, having the literacy committee have their hands in building that. So I think that was really important too, so that you have the buy-in. Oh, there's almost no one who teaches literacy who can say I had nothing to do with the pilot, the choice, the literacy committee, or and now everyone has everything to do with the adoption. So it was, I think it was collective buy-in.
You guys, that's Jennifer, that's a brilliant point. I teach class later on tonight, aspiring education leaders. I wish I had them here because you guys are really hitting on some really powerful leadership principles. So we just talked about structures that didn't feel top down. Jennifer made a really good point. One of the reasons why they didn't feel top down is because people helped to build those structures, right? And so if you're helping to build those structures, then when you implement them, it's not like the district is telling me something to do. I actually was involved in this. Becky mentioned, I forget how you described it. It was like a list of 7 things. To me, it sounded like look-fors when you go around and actually observe classrooms. Winnetka only been implementing for about 40 some days, but I hope you guys saw this. They are already going around looking and observing classrooms to figure out how things are going. I want to ask everyone who wants to participate in this question, and I'll get back to my questions that are here, but this is sort of out of nowhere. Some people on the call may be thinking to themselves, because they are not implementing a sort of shared curricula across the district. And we heard Becky, I think, talk about grieving process, and they no longer get to do their favorite book or their favorite lesson. What if there's someone on the call who's like, you know what, that's a lot to go through. Right now, people seem pretty happy. I don't know if I want to move forward on making everyone do the same thing. Anyone want to you raise your virtual hand if you want to respond to that for anybody who's thinking that way. And I'll just call on you individually. And okay, let's start with Becky, but others can raise and then I'll give you an opportunity. Go ahead, Becky.
I think that sometimes we forget as adults that we're in the business of kids, and the adults being supported is important. It's my why for getting into curriculum work. But I think when we can recenter some of those conversations around what kids gain when we change as adults, there's no more powerful point to be made.
Really important point. We're in the business centered around kids, not adults. Sometime we need to be reminded of that. Go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I would just share, I think, I've worked as a principal in another district and I was an assistant principal somewhere else prior. And so coming to Winnetka, there's a history here of like staff really making their own curricular decisions and choices, and a lot of independence and kind of like honoring that work. And so I would say that is the culture of Winnetka. And it's the place that I've worked that has the most ingrained kind of like feeling of that. And so, I think it's really important. Jen talked about like the why was important. And I think us putting research in front of teachers who consider themselves experts was helpful to challenge some of the notions. And then I also think what Becky just shared about connecting it back to students, the culture of my building is students first, and staff really pride themselves. So when you're in those conversations and you're able to redirect what is actually going to be better for kids that you're instructing. That's super important and helpful. And then we talk about this a lot. I have conversations with Becky all the time around like the cognitive load where people spend their time on things. And we had all sorts of interesting things happening, like and so I really want people to figure out how to make it work for kids, how to, have those common conversations so we can share across a grade level team or across classrooms, or what does it look like for that special education student who's in for part of the lesson and out or doing different things. And so, I think that's really important work to make sure that we're aligned on, but also to kind of push people on a little bit, because if it's best for kids, we should be doing it.
Yeah, really appreciate the point around push, appreciate the point around special ed and other ELL teachers coming into the classroom and having materials that already exist as opposed to having to train and teach other support staff is a point that sometimes we ignore around creating this coherence. The other thing you talked about was research, which is really, really important. And these materials are grounded in research. Kayla and then Jennifer.
I think too, like for us, this was a real opportunity for unity, right? So we got to hear part of what was, I guess, the gift of perhaps not going through your traditional piloting and committee work is the fact that we really got to spend time hearing from teachers about what supports they really need in order to feel ready for this shift. And so just hearing from them about the types of support that they wanted and really making that a focus and a priority, I think was crucial. And the fact that they understood like we were all in this together. And I think too, something that, we had to experience a little bit of that grieving too. And it just, again, a shout out to our ARC coach, Sarah Sandusky. There are some moments within the curriculum, especially in the literacy lab, where you're sparking that love and enthusiasm and engagement where, the framework will tell you, you could use this text or a text of your choosing. So like we also said, like, if there's a back to school book that you love and the curriculum is saying you could use this, or you could use this book, like use the book that you love and have read for 20 years. We can, I think we were also being, careful of when are we giving you flexibility, right? And when is that called out in the framework? And what also are our, I'll call them like non-negotiables, because we have to ensure that each student is getting that, kind of like that equitable experience for education, because that's so important. And kind of calling that out, I think also helped our staff to feel like, oh, okay, here's a way where I can also get some of the things that I've been, loving and I'm passionate about. And here's also where I can make sure that all students are getting that equitable experience. I think really helped us too.
Yeah, so sort of acknowledging the breaking point, right? Not pushing people to the point where they're like, it's all or nothing, right? So what Kayla just pointed out was the flexibility that's embedded in the materials that allows teachers to bring their own identity. So it's not like everything has to be thrown out. Good point. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I was going back to the question that you posed about just like, why go on this endeavor to have like a program, right? And oh wait. Okay, yeah, I couldn't tell if I was off the mic. And I think there's some like beautiful structures within ARC Core of like looking at pacing guides, looking at student writing, looking at constructive response. And when you have a program, you're all bringing that same kind of either pre, mid, or post assessment together, that formative assessment, and having conversations in your PLCs about what kids are able to do. What do we do if they don't have it? What do we do if they do? So it gives you some common ground of having conversations around kids and then around teaching practices.
Love that common ground, right? So many of you have talked about engaging teachers directly and hearing back from during the implementation process, prior to the implementation process, and just creating that commonality around common language across the school, across the district has to be powerful. Let me jump in. I think we're doing just fine with time. I don't know if anyone wants to talk, if someone could talk a little bit. I'm sure someone's thinking to themselves, okay, what are the implications for funding? Did you have additional funding? Was this something that created a major problem? There are materials, there's professional development. Anyone want to take up the funding question because it's a real question that people might have? No funding. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure
I
we have.
can
Go ahead,
talk
Becky.
about it from the Winnetka perspective. We knew that this was going to be a major purchase, K through 8. And so we started working as a department to figure out where we might be able to make some cuts. And so some of our staff members that were accustomed to being able to go to conferences or maybe get more materials more easily, we weren't able to do that. We also had to work very closely with our superintendent and our chief school business official to make sure that they were apprised of the cost of things and were able to plan for that in advance. We have a local foundation, which is chaired and run by parents who also help to do some fundraising to assist with the cost of professional learning. It was definitely a big ask. And one of the things that I did during the pilot was ask for quotes so that I could get a cost idea, because one of the great things about ARC is that it comes with so many materials like the book bins, but that also means there's a cost for that to ensure that our classrooms are properly equipped. We weren't able to purchase everything from ARC out of the gate as we had hoped. So one example is the books that come in the book bins are also available digitally, but that's an additional cost. That's not something that we could afford. So we had to be very thoughtful about what we were purchasing. When meeting with the team at ARC, once we had decided to adopt, we had to make the choice between, are we emphasizing the knowledge building? Or are we emphasizing the ERLA? Because there's an additional cost with buying the toolkits. And for our needs, it was more about the knowledge building piece. And so we also had to make some choices to not be able to get everything in that first year. And when I look back and think about like all the options and then what we do have for teachers, I'm glad that we didn't layer on too much from the start, both from the financial perspective, but also, what can they realistically handle?
Oh, such a really good point there at the end. If I'm hearing you correctly, you would have hoped to have purchased more from the beginning. To have purchased more would have been more on teachers also. So being more strategic around what you're able to purchase actually played out well for what teachers could handle, is what I hear. And that's really, really thoughtful. And I hear some real thoughtfulness around, okay, since you have to make some choices around what we're going to purchase, what do we need most? What's most aligned to our needs as we think about what to purchase? And then the last thing you talked about, Becky, for me was multiple sources of funding, right? So yes, district aligned funds, but also some community-based foundations or whatever the case may be, multiple ways to fund this. Go ahead, Kayla.
So we use a mixture of grant funding, and we also worked with our Board of Aldermen for a non-lapsing account as a way to also help with the cost. I think also what helped us is we were already using the ERLA and the toolkits K through 2. We had started that. Grade 2 was our pilot of that in 2017. And through the years, by 2020, K through 2 was using ERLA and the toolkits. So we were also recognizing this as a real opportunity to invest, and that it would be most beneficial, especially for our teachers at the primary grade levels, K through 2, because they had already had experience with ERLA and the toolkit instruction. It was really more about learning the core curriculum. And then what we did for grades 4 and 5, who are now implementing this year the core curriculum, last year they focused on ERLA and the toolkits. And so in a similar vein to what Becky is talking about, we tried to think strategically about how we could, I would say, make that new learning really invest in, and I would say like little bursts of it, right? Like we're focusing this year on just small group instruction and ERLA and the toolkits, and that is great. And then next year, you'll have that under your belt, and then we will focus on the core curriculum. And that also helped us with cost, right? Because you're not buying everything all at once. And so in working in partnership with other districts in Connecticut who are interested in ARC and ARC Core, that's something that we talk about in terms of funding. You might have to do more of like a gradual adoption process.
Yeah, really smart leadership on the part of both of these districts. Because what I'm hearing is not only strategic implementation based on needs of the students and teachers, but also strategic implementation based on need, teachers and students, aligned to resourcing, right? That's the part that I wanted to make that connection to, right? So not only are we thinking about how do we implement this in a thoughtful way for teachers based on the needs of students, but how can we do it in a way that phases it in, that allows us to purchase the things that we need at the right time. Really, really important. I think we've got about 9 minutes or so. Two final questions, and love to hear from everyone regarding both these questions. I'll start with the first one, which is, and we don't have to go by district. We can just go by individuals. Lessons learned. Like if you were to look back and say, you know what, maybe if we had to do it all over again, this is something we might do a little differently, or this is something I would recommend districts that are implementing in the future consider. It's not necessarily saying you did something wrong, but it is saying, had I to do it over again, we might do it a little differently. And at any level, it could be district, it could be in the classroom, it could be at a school level. Who's going to kick us off? I might have to call someone. Go ahead, Becky.
I can share. I think one thing that I would have done earlier on is partner with our Department of Student Services. We partnered with them probably a quarter or a third into the process. But at that point, in terms of budgeting, because we did elect to train and equip our special education teachers if they were co-teaching or teaching resource. And that was a significant increase in cost, as well as finding time, to be able to pull teachers from classrooms, which is always tricky. So I think having them involved earlier, and then also that idea of continuity of programming, how is what they're using in a replacement class or an instructional level class sort of working on that same continuum with the materials that we're readying to adopt. So I wish I would have done that earlier in the process. And then I think kind of paired with that helped to emphasize the benefit of using a guaranteed and viable curriculum for the adults that are in a support role. So I was just talking with a principal today who talked about one of the bright spots that he's seeing is now his special education teachers aren't needing to make supplemental resources. The interventionist has a more clear picture of what's happening because all of the 7th grade teachers are doing the same thing, or all of the 4th grade teachers are doing the same thing. So while we have this, emphasis and focus on these pieces, I think those like peripherals could have been helpful for some in terms of the why or the buy-in piece.
That's helpful. Other departments, particularly student services, others?
Yeah, I was just going to share, I think, in addition to that, like one thing that I think was missing in some of our work, and we've talked about this a little bit, is just around like focus groups. So we had our literacy hub that came together a lot to talk, but like, how do you meet with teachers and teams outside of those hubs? And I think we had a pretty aggressive timeline. Although it felt long, it also felt short at the same time. So I don't know how that's possible, but it did. And so I think like figuring out how to work in some of those to get more information that's maybe not just from a survey, but you're actually like talking with people. We did that well, I think, with the literacy committee. But there were other places, we have 5 schools in our district. So how are we doing that across the 5 schools?
Thank you very much. More focus groups. Go ahead, Amy. Thank you.
I think, we started this with grade 2. That was our first pilot. And I think one thing I would tell someone who is starting this is collegial observations. Even if it's older grades is having them go in and seeing it unfold is extremely important. That would be one of my recommendations.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. One of my favorite quotes, isolation is the enemy of improvement. Isolation is the enemy of improvement. So if you want to get better, try to connect with someone who's doing things a bit better. Yeah, go ahead, Kayla.
I have a similar answer to Becky. I think definitely including our special education teachers. They were definitely included in terms of our core, the core curriculum. But I think what we've been really doing now in partnership with building principals, our coaches, Sarah Sandusky, we've been really giving our special education teachers more tailored and differentiated professional learning around IRLA and around the levels and what's the focus of each level? How does it tie to what they're doing with students? And also, can we align our IEP goals and objectives to the IRLA levels? Can we make sure that we're having a collaboration? When you're looking at school pace and you're seeing, data from the classroom teacher, how can you as a special education teacher and provider help support that? And so again, they were involved in the process, but I think really sitting down with them and hearing about like what their needs are, how we could tailor our professional learning to them and what they wanted to learn, I think was really impactful. And now that we're getting ready to move ARC up to the middle school, the first introduction, I had our special education teachers present as well. And I made sure, so you learn from your, you learn by doing, and that's sometimes the most powerful lessons as well.
Absolutely. There's learning built into the process of implementation, provided you're catching it and then you're making those changes as a result of it. We've got 3 minutes. This is the last thing I'll ask each panelist to do. What's one word to summarize? If everyone can think about one word that would capture the importance of high quality implementation of curriculum materials, what's that word that you would share, particularly with people who might be in a position where they are debating or they're wondering? What's one word that would capture it? And I'm going to call on you individually. You can say why you chose your word, or you can just say your word. I'm going to go in this order. I'm going to start with Amy, then Kayla, and then Aaron, then Becky, then Jennifer, then Luke. Go ahead, Amy.
I'd say effective. We've seen progress. We've seen growth. We've seen it across grade levels. And I would say effective because now we have true planning to the correct level that our students are reading. And it is showing throughout, across the grade levels and that homeschool piece connection. I mean, it's just, there's so many multiple layers here. The first thing I think of when I think of IRLA is it's effective. We're seeing the progress we want.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. Kayla?
Hope. And I say hope because I think for a while we were, feeling a bit discouraged about, the results and maybe not meeting the needs of our students the best that we could. And I think adopting a highly effective, quality, rigorous knowledge building curriculum, it's all around the district. What I hear is hope, from our secondary teachers who are, I share with them, our elementary data, and they have hope for, what's coming up next. And then talking to middle school about the new curriculum that's coming their way, hope. Like, it's just that positivity and that hope for something better that I think inspires us to bring our best every single day.
Thank you so much. Aaron?
I would say enthusiasm. As we have learned more about this curriculum, everybody has had so much enthusiasm about it, and it trickles down. So from all the stakeholders in our community to our administrators to teachers and then down to the students, everybody is so excited, and students are coming up to me every day talking about how excited they are to be growing as readers and telling me what their progress has been. I think building that enthusiasm ensures that we have the motivation to work hard to make it successful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. Becky?
Empowered is what comes to mind. Empowering students to be able to unlock the magic of reading and writing. empowering teachers to be able to help students do that through the use of high quality materials and professional learning. And then also empowering the staff that works alongside with teachers so they have clarity and know what their role can be in supporting students.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jennifer?
I would say engaging. I think engaging, obviously we engaged a lot of the adults in the process and then in the implementation, but engaging for the students, engaging, their overall engagement is increased, right? When they're in a lesson, engaging in conversation and reading, being excited about what they're reading, the range of texts that are available, the engagement in doing a research project, engagement in the writing.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then Luke.
Yeah, I was going to say integrating, and I think more so just the writing that is really about the reading. So we're not just asking reading comprehension questions, but it's more robust and going deeper with students to that like higher form of rigor and asking them to do that work in a deeper and meaningful way.
Powerful. Thank you so much. All of these words are, I think a lot of these words are, I would associate with this webinar. Wonderful job. Very, very informative. You can tell that you guys are doing the work on the ground in a way that is great for not only kids, but for educators. And it's just an honor to facilitate the conversation. Megan, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I know you didn't ask me, but I'm going to say my word is mission. And the reason why is because the mission at American Reading Company is to get all students reading and writing on or above grade level. And I think when we think about reading, writing, and results, as we look in the chat, as we hear from these two districts today, we are making results for students to become those avid readers and to be those successful readers and writers. So thank you, thank you, thank you to Ansonia and to Winnetka and to you, Dr. Scott. We so enjoyed these conversations with practitioners, and we look forward to our winter Voices from the Field, which will be around writing. I think Luke just mentioned it, integrating that reading and writing. So we are writing on day one, and we look forward to hosting other ARC partners across the country to hear their best practices. So thank you all and have a great evening. And we really appreciate you joining today.